Hello there and welcome to another video. So Super Mario and Zelda are probably two of the most iconic gaming franchises ever, and both of them now have their own game on the Nintendo Switch. So the question is, if you're buying a Switch, which one should you get first? I should mention that these are amazing games, so you really should get both of them at some point if you own a Switch, but if you have to choose between them, well, that can be quite hard to decide, to be honest. But I hope to answer that for you. And this is just the base game of Zelda and Mario, so I'm not covering any DLC. Mostly because Mario doesn't have DLC just yet, might not even get it, but I would assume it gets at some point. So starting off with the gameplay. So gameplay wise, these are obviously two very different games. Zelda of course being an action-adventure game, while Mario is a platformer. So in Breath of the Wild you will be running around killing stuff, obtaining new gear and equipment, and solving puzzles. While in Mario you jump and run around on platforms to traverse the levels. There is some combat in Odyssey. I mean, you can throw your cap and kill some enemies and take control over some of them, but it's of course not the main focus of the game to defeat enemies. But what they do have in common is that both Super Mario Odyssey and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild are very centered around exploration, and in that way they are quite similar. The real difference being what you are exploring and how you are exploring it. You see, in Mario you basically explore different kingdoms that are varying sizes. Most of them are quite small to like medium sized, I guess. I mean, it takes at most a few minutes to run from one end to the other end of the map, or kingdom, I guess. Compared to Breath of the Wild's map, where it takes a really long time to run across the map. To the point where I don't honestly have the time to test that right now, because the map is huge. But to compensate for that, Odyssey is filled with collectibles. Basically moons and purple coins and just regular coins. These are hidden from very obvious to surprisingly hard to find, especially considering the size of the map, or, well, kingdom once again, I guess. So basically we have Breath of the Wild with a huge map and you explore it, but not in too depth. And on the other side we have Super Mario Odyssey with relatively small maps, where you end up exploring more or less every inch of the map to find everything. What you prefer is completely up to you, but in the end, mostly due to the scale of the map, I find that Zelda has a lot more to explore, even though it's not as dense as the kingdoms in Super Mario Odyssey. And that is one thing Nintendo really nailed with Odyssey. Even though the maps are so small, they are incredibly dense with so many things to look at, to pick up, and it's a lot more dense, as I said, than Zelda is. Difficulty in games is something I find very interesting. I love challenging games and skill-based games, but I don't mind playing easier ones either. Something Super Mario Odyssey has received a lot of critique for is just that. The difficulty. Many say that the game is way too easy, which is true if you want to play it that way. You see, while playing through the game I realized that there are so many different ways to overcome and get through each obstacle. Oftentimes you have a standard way, which normally means there's a monster or enemy that you can capture to get past it, or you could use Cappy in some clever ways to get past it. And that's why I absolutely love the difficulty in Odyssey. Because you can indirectly choose your own difficulty depending on what you feel like doing. One of the reasons this is possible is because the game is easy. Meaning that there are normally many platforms to jump on, which if you decide to tackle the obstacles in a more advanced way, you can use them however you want. It gives you more options the more platforms you have, which mixes really well with the Cappy techniques and mechanics. And I will of course show you some examples on screen right now so that you get what I mean. And on the other side you have Breath of the Wild, which is very different. When playing the early parts of the game, I found them to be rather challenging, because when you're starting out, your weapons break incredibly fast, your runes are very weak, low health, low stamina, basically no armor. Well, you get what I mean. So the early game is totally offering you a challenge. But that's just the beginning. I found that towards like the later parts of the early game to the mid and end game, it is significantly easier than in the beginning. And it's to the point where I would call Breath of the Wild to be an easy game, once you get the hang of it. mainly due to how overpowered Link gets towards the end, because you have the mysterious sword that they talk about. I don't want to spoil anything, and your armors are very powerful towards the end. They give amazing bonuses. I mean, you can limit yourself to make the game more challenging, which can be a viable option if you want it slightly more difficult, but in this case it's not really rewarding you in any way for making the game more challenging. Sure, it is more satisfying overcoming such challenges, like if you're limiting yourself. However, it's not as good as in Mario, where your rewards, once again, satisfaction, but you're also being rewarded by being able to complete that section smoother, quicker and more efficient, which is really enjoyable. But again, this is completely up to you. As I started off saying, I find difficulty in video games to be very interesting, and here we clearly have two completely different takes on the difficulties and challenges. Length. So the length of these games are once again up to the player, how he or she tackles everything. I've almost completed the main story of Zelda. In fact, I've played up to the final boss twice, but not continued playing all the way towards the end for some reason. This playthrough though, I have done some exploration and side quests, but mainly focusing on the storyline. And 30 or so hours have passed so far. In Mario, I've spent 15 hours or more, according to my Switch profile. It took me about 7.5 hours to complete the main storyline, which is rather short. It's also worth mentioning that I normally don't tend to explore every single area, and I'm generally quite sloppy while searching for stuff, as I like to go for the main storylines and not just collect stuff, and that's just how I play my games. But you will have a completely different experience. If you were to 100% these games, people have estimated it to take around 100 hours to complete Breath of the Wild and around 60 hours to complete Odyssey, which I would assume are in the lower ends, or if you are quite efficient. But to be honest, none of these games are very short. I personally think Odyssey has greater replay value, because how rewarding it is to find quicker and more efficient routes to take, so you will end up making multiple save files and getting better that way. While in Breath of the Wild you have one big save file that you focus on and collect everything there to make Link as powerful as possible and complete all of the side quests. To be honest, I don't think Breath of the Wild has the same replay value as Mario Odyssey for that reason, because once you've done something in Breath of the Wild, you don't really want to do it again because it feels like you've lost everything. But in Mario, I feel that it's okay, because in Odyssey you actually get better as a player. And it's not really the same thing about Breath of the Wild, because I feel that while Breath of the Wild has a more difficult entry point, it kind of scales down as you progress. You don't, like, you reach a point where you feel like you've more or less mastered every aspect of the game. Well, obviously not mastered, but you've gotten really good at everything the game throws at you. While in Mario you cannot really get to that point without spending, you know, hundreds or possibly thousands of hours, because there's so much timing and frame perfect reactions that you can work on. So moving on to the performance and the technical stuff. So I don't want to bore you with too many technical details. Digital Foundry have covered both of these games' performance in depth, that if you're interested, I would highly recommend watching. But to put it simple, both of these games use what's called a dynamic resolution, meaning that the resolution adjusts itself depending on the situation and what's going on screen. Nothing is wrong with that, it's actually a pretty common technique used to prevent the frame rate from dropping too low during action-heavy scenes. And if you ask me, it's quite a smart way of dealing with it. Now, as for the frame rates, starting with Super Mario Odyssey, it is actually running at 60 FPS. I think that's quite amazing, really. And the best thing is that the frame rate is very consistent, and during my time playing this game I haven't encountered that many frame drops at all. The only area where I consistently experience drops is in New Donk City, especially in the area where the Odyssey is parked, or has landed, I guess, but I don't mind that too much. It stays at 60 FPS where it is important, and I really wish I could say the same about Breath of the Wild, which caps at 30 FPS, which is fine. I mean, Zelda doesn't really require as many precise button inputs based on reaction as Mario does, and since the game is so good, I mean, I can live with 30. I'm not the type of person who refuses to play a game if it's not in 60 FPS. Sure, I prefer 60, but if the game is good enough, I think 30 is perfectly fine. But the problem is that the FPS drops quite frequently, especially in areas like Kakariko Village and on high places where you can see many things, basically where the Switch has to deal with a lot of things to draw in the distance and so many things to update. And sometimes when running and hitting enemies, it's like the game freezes for a second, which is really weird. I found that to be most common with the big guys. I'm not sure what they are called. But basically the big moblins, if you run and hit them, sometimes the game freezes. Once again, this is rather nitpicky, and it's definitely not that bad all the time. I still think it's worth mentioning, especially if you're incredibly sensitive to low frame rates. Then you should be aware that Breath of the Wild kind of struggles with it at times. It is actually quite a bit better in handheld mode than in docked mode. It's like the performance increase when docked doesn't scale that well with the resolution increase in the docked mode, which is kind of interesting. So when it comes to performance, Mario definitely runs better than Zelda, and it jumps quite a bit better too, with a higher and more consistent frame rate. The bottom line though is that none of these games are really hindered by technical limitations. At times Zelda, but if you're enjoying the combat and the exploration, you really should be able to get past that. So, with all that said, which is the game that you should buy first? If you currently have no game whatsoever on your Switch, then I would highly recommend to buy Zelda first, as that game is guaranteed to have the most content if you're not much of a collector, which is a great deal in Mario Odyssey's length. The story in Breath of the Wild is longer and more fleshed out than in Mario. There are more side quests, there are just more and varied things to do in that game. But if you are looking for a game that is extremely easy to pick up but takes hours and hours to master and has a relatively big and easy to get into speedrunning scene, then I think you should go for Mario Odyssey. Also, Super Mario Odyssey is co-op, which doesn't exist at all in Breath of the Wild, so if you want to play with some friends, then Super Mario Odyssey is quite fun, because what you do is one player controls Mario and one controls Cappy. And it's a lot of fun, to be honest. I played with my friend a few weeks ago and it was so much fun. It was a bit chaotic at times, but a lot of fun. And as I've previously said, in Mario you're doing much of the same, but learn to do it good. And in Zelda you're doing a bit of everything, everywhere. I hope that makes sense to you. To be fair, these are probably the two best games on the Switch at the moment. At least the two games that have all across the board received extremely high review scores. I mean, I've played both of them, and I can highly recommend them. Anyways, let me know which game you're picking up first, or if you're buying both at the same time. Thanks for watching, and have a great day, or night, whenever you're watching this. And I hope to see you in the next video.